At my niece's wedding, they placed my table behind a column. I smiled and left in silence. Then I canceled the payment for the party. If you're watching this, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I stood behind the marble column, watching the celebration I had paid for through a veil of controlled tears. The golden lights of the Fairmont Hotel's ballroom cast shadows across my blue silk dress as I observed my granddaughter dancing with her new husband. Nobody noticed me here, the invisible matriarch, hidden away like an embarrassing family secret. This wasn't an accident. This was by design, their design. But they forgot who I am, who I've always been. The teacup trembled slightly in my hands as I carried the silver tray into the kitchen. Through the open window, I could hear Caroline and Rebecca chatting excitedly on the veranda of my Beacon Hill home. Their animated voices drifted in with the spring breeze. "So we'll have to clear out most of that old stuff," Caroline, my daughter, was saying. "The room desperately needs updating." "Do you think she'll resist?" Rebecca asked, her voice dropping slightly. I smiled to myself, heart warming at their enthusiasm. Perhaps they were finally planning that family trip I'd suggested months ago. Something to bring us together again, before my upcoming 80th birthday, the milestone that would mark the official transfer of the Sullivan Family Trust to the next guardian. "Mom barely notices changes anymore," Caroline replied confidently. "Besides, we're doing her a favor. That guest room is straight out of the 1980s. My smile faltered as I placed the cups down harder than intended. Not a trip then. They were discussing renovations to my home. Again. That evening, during dinner in the formal dining room that had hosted senators and diplomats throughout my husband's career, Rebecca clinked her glass for attention. "Grandma, we've been thinking about your guest bedroom." "Oh?" I kept my face neutral. Years of negotiation training, serving me well. "It needs a complete overhaul. You know, for when we'll need to take over your house, Mom." She said it so casually, as if discussing the weather rather than my eventual decline. Jackson, Rebecca's fiancé, looked uncomfortable. "I'm sure that's a long way off." "Becca, 78 isn't young," Caroline interjected with a tight smile. "We're just being practical." Later in my study, I sorted through framed achievements, my Harvard teaching awards, photographs with world leaders, acknowledgement letters from presidents, thankful for my extraordinary ability to anticipate moves and build invisible alliances. Caroline had insisted I simplify the decor, claiming these memories were cluttering up the place. I paused at a framed letter from a former president. My fingers traced the glass over his handwritten note about my strategic mind. Where had that woman gone? At dinner the next evening, I tried sharing stories about our family history. "Your grandfather used to say that the Sullivan name opened doors, but it was character that kept them open." "Does anyone want more wine?" Caroline interrupted, smiling brightly, as if I hadn't been speaking at all. I cleared my throat to continue, but Rebecca glanced pointedly at her watch. "It's getting late, Grandma." Only Jackson seemed genuinely interested. "Please continue, Ms. Sullivan. I'd love to hear about the judge." "Thank you, Jackson," I said, noting how Rebecca's eyes narrowed at his encouragement. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered down for tea. Caroline's voice drifted from the study, door slightly ajar. "Yes, Mom's getting more fragile, but her mind is still good enough to sign papers. We need to accelerate everything before her 80th birthday." The teacup nearly slipped from my hand. My 80th birthday, 14 months away, was when control of significant Sullivan family assets would transfer, the cornerstone of our legacy, built by generations. I stood motionless in the hallway, heart pounding against my ribs, not from fear, but from a sudden, clarifying anger. The woman who had taught strategic negotiation at Harvard for 30 years hadn't disappeared. She'd just been lulled into complacency by the illusion of family loyalty. Returning to my room, I opened my drawer and withdrew my late husband's silver pocket watch. Judge Sullivan had carried it through countless trials, claiming it helped him see the moment when truth emerged in his courtroom. I needed to see truths now, too. As I closed my fingers around the cool silver, something shifted inside me, a dormant sense awakening. My family saw a fragile old woman fading into irrelevance. They had forgotten who Margaret Sullivan really was, and that would be their first mistake. 2 weeks later, Rebecca announced her engagement to Jackson Pearson amidst champagne and congratulations at my home. I watched her through new eyes, noting how her behavior shifted depending on what she needed: syrupy sweetness when requesting my credit card for the engagement party, rehearsed hugs when mentioning venue deposits. "Grandma, you look lovely tonight," she cooed, kissing my cheek while simultaneously eyeing the diamond brooch pinned to my dress, a Sullivan family heirloom worn by brides for generations. "Thank you, dear. The brooch will be yours to wear on your wedding day, as tradition dictates." I touched it gently, watching her eyes light up not with appreciation for its history, but with calculation of its value. The silver pocket watch rested in my handbag, its weight both comfort and reminder of the woman I once was: respected, powerful, strategic. "We should all go to the cake tasting together," I suggested during dinner. "Your grandfather had the most remarkable sweet tooth." "Absolutely," Caroline responded with manufactured enthusiasm. "I'll text you the details." 3 days later, I arrived at the prestigious bakery at the agreed time, only to find them already finishing up. The display cake models were being put away as I approached. "Mother, what are you doing here?" Caroline's surprise seemed genuine. "We had an appointment for the tasting." Rebecca's momentary panic melted into practiced concern. "Grandma, we rescheduled for this morning. I texted you. Don't you remember?" I checked my phone. No message. "We thought you decided to rest instead," Caroline added smoothly. "You mentioned being tired yesterday." I hadn't. The head pastry chef recognized me as he emerged from the kitchen. "Mrs. Sullivan, is that really you? I haven't seen you since the governor's fundraiser your husband hosted." "What an honor to prepare your granddaughter's cake." His sincere respect only highlighted the absence of it from my own family. The stark contrast twisted something inside me. "The decision's already been made, I'm afraid," I said pleasantly. Apparently, I needed my rest. Back home, I accidentally discovered a list that had fallen from Rebecca's planner during her last visit. In her neat handwriting, "How to handle grandma during wedding events. Keep her occupied with simple tasks. Limit speaking time. Avoid embarrassing stories. Seat with quieter guests who won't mind repetition. Position away from main photographer's angles. Age spots difficult to retouch. Have Caroline monitor medication schedule." My hands didn't shake as I read it. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, like the moment before a master chess player recognizes the path to checkmate. That evening, I found myself standing before my bathroom mirror, truly seeing myself for the first time in years. The elegant woman who had commanded classrooms and boardrooms hadn't disappeared. She had simply been gaslighted into believing she was diminished. "They think you're just a checkbook with a pulse," I whispered to my reflection. "A convenient ATM for wedding expenses with an expiration date conveniently set after your 80th birthday." I straightened my shoulders, noting how this simple act transformed my appearance from frail to formidable. The woman staring back wasn't ready to be written off or hidden behind columns. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Judith, it's Margaret Sullivan. I believe I may need some legal advice." The weight of the pocket watch in my hand no longer felt like nostalgia. It felt like a countdown. "Grandma, this means everything to me," Rebecca said, her eyes glistening with tears I now recognized as calculated. We sat in my sunroom a month after the engagement, Jackson beside her on the antique sofa I'd imported from France during happier days. "The Fairmont has always been my dream wedding venue," she continued. "But the costs are—" She trailed off, looking down at her perfectly manicured hands. "Substantial," I finished for her, noting how Jackson shifted uncomfortably. Caroline touched her daughter's shoulder. "We wouldn't ask if it weren't so important to Rebecca. The Fairmont has such history, such prestige. What they meant was such expense. The kind of expense that would significantly deplete my liquid assets before my 80th birthday. I've always wanted to honor the Sullivan legacy," Rebecca added, voice quavering perfectly. "To celebrate in a place worthy of our family name." The family name they'd belittled when they thought I couldn't hear. The legacy they dismissed as outdated when rejecting my stories. "Of course I'll help," I said, my smile not reaching my eyes. "The venue, flowers, band, and honeymoon. Consider it my gift." Rebecca's performance of gratitude was flawless: tears, hugs, exclamations of how I was the most generous grandmother ever. I accepted it all with the grace of someone who had taught negotiation tactics to future diplomats and CEOs, recognizing the manipulation for what it was. Later, as they were leaving, I overheard Jackson in the hallway. "Don't you think we're taking advantage?" he asked Rebecca in a lowered voice. Your grandmother is incredibly generous, but stop worrying, Rebecca interrupted. Grandma loves feeling needed. Besides, she's showing signs of cognitive decline. Caroline and I are just helping protect her from herself. I stepped back into the shadows, silent in my stockinged feet. What decline? She seems sharper than both of us put together. You don't see her daily like we do, Rebecca insisted. She gets confused, forgets things. The doctor says it's early stages. My jaw clenched. I had no such doctor, had received no such diagnosis. When they left, Caroline called. Rebecca went too far today, she said, sounding genuinely concerned. The Fairmont, flowers, band, and honeymoon. It's excessive. But you didn't stop her, I noted, keeping my voice light. A pause. Well, she's set on this dream wedding, and you seemed happy to help. I am, I assured her, fingers wrapping around the small recording device I'd received as a gift from a former student who worked in security technology. Very happy to help in exactly the ways expected of me. That night, I sat at my desk, calculator in hand, meticulously mapping out exactly how much the dream wedding would cost. Next to these figures, I wrote down the current balances of my accounts and the projected Sullivan trust transfer value. Their manipulation wasn't just hurtful, it was strategically timed to deplete my resources before my birthday milestone. They weren't just dismissing me, they were systematically undermining my financial independence. I opened the antique box where I kept my most precious jewelry. Beneath the tray lay documentation of accounts, unknown to Caroline, investments my husband and I had made decades ago, quietly growing while I played the role of the predictable widow. The recorder sat beside my notes, its small red light blinking as I tested it. A simple device, easily concealed in a handbag or pocket. Designed for business meetings, it would now document family betrayal. Begin recording, I said clearly. Project Restoration, Day 1. My voice sounded different, stronger, clearer than it had in years. I hadn't realized how much I'd diminished myself to fit their expectations of a doddering old woman. Rain began tapping against the window as I worked through the night, developing contingencies, analyzing vulnerabilities, identifying potential allies. By dawn, I'd outlined a strategy that would have made my Harvard colleagues proud. I had 14 months until my 80th birthday, but wouldn't need nearly that long. The Sullivan legacy wasn't just money and property. It was resilience. It was strategy. It was justice. And I was about to teach my family a masterclass. 3 months before the wedding, I arrived unannounced at Caroline's house. The family sapphire brooch nestled in a velvet box in my purse. A tradition spanning 5 generations of Sullivan brides, it represented something I still foolishly hoped might matter to Rebecca. Voices drifted from the kitchen as I quietly let myself in with my key. I paused in the hallway, hearing laughter. God! It's exhausting having to listen to her ramble about Dad's cases for the millionth time, Caroline was saying. She actually tried to tell me about the judicial appointment again yesterday. At least you can leave after dinner, Rebecca replied, her voice light with amusement. During the venue tour, she kept asking questions about accessibility. So embarrassing. The wedding planner probably thinks she's senile. After the wedding, we can finally stop pretending we care about her boring stories. Rebecca's dismissive tone made my heart constrict. I've been practicing my sad face for when we eventually have to discuss memory care options. Caroline's response froze me in place. We just need to maintain appearances until the will is secured and the 80th birthday transfer is complete. Once the trust transfers, we can make decisions on her behalf. Jackson actually suggested inviting her to the rehearsal dinner head table. Rebecca's disgusted tone left no doubt about her feelings. Can you imagine? Those event photographers charge extra for retouching. What did you tell him? That her health might make such a long evening difficult, he bought it completely. My fingers trembled as I activated the recorder in my pocket, capturing every word of their calculated cruelty. I backed away silently, decades of self-discipline preventing me from confronting them. Knowledge was power. Reaction was weakness. I slipped out as quietly as I'd entered, the sapphire brooch still in my purse. At home, I sat in my study, the velvet box open before me. 5 generations of Sullivan women had worn this brooch on their wedding days, strong women who had weathered wars, economic collapses, and personal tragedies with dignity. Beside it lay Judge Sullivan's pocket watch, its silver case gleaming in the lamplight. I ran my thumb over the engraved inscription, Veritas Tempus Revelate. Truth is revealed by time. For the first time in years, I truly remembered who I was. Not just the accommodating grandmother I'd allowed myself to become, but the strategist who had once commanded respect in lecture halls and boardrooms, the woman whose negotiation tactics were studied at Harvard and whose counsel was sought by powerful figures. I'd spent years diminishing myself to avoid being seen as difficult or demanding. I'd accepted being interrupted, dismissed, and marginalized to maintain family peace. That ended tonight. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Thomas? Margaret Sullivan. Yes, it's been too long. I need to meet with you about my estate planning. No, not next month. Tomorrow morning. Next, I called my bank and requested a comprehensive review of all my accounts and investments. Then my accountant, who sounded surprised to hear directly from me rather than Caroline. Finally, I called Dr. Winters, who had been my physician for decades. Margaret, wonderful to hear from you. How can I help? I need a complete cognitive assessment, Richard. Documented thoroughly. Are you experiencing symptoms that concern you? His voice shifted to professional mode. No symptoms, just family members who find it convenient to suggest I'm in decline. Silence, then a weary sigh. Unfortunately, I see this more often than you'd think. I can fit you in tomorrow at 2 p.m. I hung up and stared at the brooch, seeing not just its sapphires and diamonds, but the legacy it represented. I'd been entrusted with the Sullivan name, its resources, and its reputation. I had a responsibility to protect that legacy from those who viewed it merely as an inheritance to be seized. Outside, thunder rumbled across Boston's skyline as rain lashed against century-old window panes. I moved to my desk and began writing. Plans forming with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They wanted the doddering grandmother who signed checks without questions. They were about to meet the strategist who had been silently watching their every move. And unlike them, I would not underestimate my opponent. I maintained perfect composure the next morning when Caroline called to check in after my unannounced visit to her home. I was in the neighborhood, I said pleasantly, but you weren't home, so I left. You should have called first, Mother. Her concern sounded genuine, but I now recognized it as performance. You shouldn't be driving across Boston alone. I took a taxi, I lied smoothly. My appointment with Thomas Harrington was nearby. A pause. Your estate attorney? Why are you meeting with him? Just routine updates. Nothing to worry about. I kept my voice light, aware that every interaction now was strategic. Rebecca asked about increasing the flower budget for the wedding. I told the florist to accommodate whatever she wants. The distraction worked perfectly. Caroline immediately shifted to wedding details, her momentary concern forgotten. After reassuring her that I was happy to cover the additional costs, I ended the call to prepare for my day of appointments. Thomas Harrington's office hadn't changed in the 20 years he'd managed the Sullivan legal affairs. The leather chairs, law books, and discreet photographs of Thomas with notable clients spoke of old-world reliability. Margaret, he said, rising to greet me with genuine warmth. You're looking well. Appearances can be deceiving, Thomas. I need your help. For the next hour, I outlined what I'd discovered and what I suspected. Thomas took notes, his expression growing increasingly troubled. What you're describing could constitute elder abuse, Margaret. Financial exploitation at minimum. I'm not interested in legal action against my family, I clarified. I want protection and, if necessary, accountability. We spent the morning reviewing my will, trusts, and powers of attorney. By noon, I had signed documents revoking Caroline's access to my accounts and establishing new protections that would be nearly impossible to challenge. The cognitive assessment with Dr. Winters will provide additional security, Thomas assured me. But Margaret, you should understand, if your family is planning what you suspect, there will be significant fallout when they discover what you've done. I'm counting on it, I replied, signing the final document with a steady hand. My appointment with Dr. Winters was equally productive. After thorough testing, he documented that I was cognitively intact, showing no signs of dementia or diminished capacity. The official medical record would make any claims of my decline difficult to sustain. Between appointments, I visited my bank, where the manager welcomed me personally, a courtesy extended to few customers. Mrs. Sullivan, we've prepared the account summaries you requested. I reviewed my financial position thoroughly, making several significant changes. New accounts were established with specific instructions about automatic payments and cancellation protocols. I arranged for large deposits to wedding vendors with an unusual structure, substantial amounts up front, with final payments scheduled for the wedding day itself. These arrangements are unconventional, the manager noted carefully, but perfectly legal, I finished for him. My perfect payment history and relationship with these vendors allows for some flexibility. That evening, I met with the wedding planner at my home, reviewing every contract carefully. Mrs. Sullivan, we rarely structure payments this way, she said, clearly confused by my insistence on the unusual arrangement. The vendors have agreed to the terms, I reminded her. Final payments processed automatically on the wedding day, with a 24-hour cancellation option without penalty. She nodded reluctantly. As you wish. Rebecca mentioned you might need some accommodation. Did she? I smiled pleasantly. How thoughtful of her. For the honeymoon in Tuscany, I arranged 2 sets of reservations, the official ones Rebecca knew about, and a second set in my name alone, both at the same exclusive properties, but with different arrival dates. Over the next week, I meticulously documented every interaction with Caroline and Rebecca, my small recorder capturing their dismissive comments and manipulative tactics. I noted how they excluded me from key wedding decisions while simultaneously asking for additional funds. I maintained my role as the compliant grandmother, approving every extravagant request with an enigmatic smile that neither of them bothered to interpret. They saw what they expected to see, an aging woman eager to please, not a strategist methodically setting the stage. At night, I categorized the recordings, noting patterns of behavior and particularly egregious comments. I wasn't building a case for court. I was assembling evidence of the truth, both for them and perhaps someday for Jackson, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his fiance's behavior. The silver pocket watch became my constant companion, its weight in my hand a reminder of justice delayed but not denied. 14 days after beginning Project Restoration, I stood in my study surveying the documentation of my family's betrayal and my responsive strategy. Everything was in place. Now, I would need allies. The time had come to step out of the shadows and reclaim my place at the table, or perhaps, from behind the column they had chosen for me. Margaret Sullivan, where have you been hiding yourself? Judith Hawthorne embraced me warmly as we met for lunch at the Ritz-Carlton. Her elegant gray suit and confident bearing reminded me of the woman I used to be, the woman I was becoming again. Apparently behind a convenient veil of presumed senility, I replied with a wry smile. Judith, my oldest friend and a retired corporate attorney, renowned for her ruthless effectiveness, studied me over her martini. Tell me everything. I did, watching her expression shift from concern to outrage, to calculating determination, the look that had terrified opposing counsel for decades. They're manipulating you toward a crisis point, timed perfectly with your 80th birthday, she concluded. Classic predatory behavior disguised as family concern. Precisely, and I've secured the financial and legal protections needed. I sipped my water, still maintaining the appearance of the grandmother who wouldn't dream of ordering a midday cocktail. But I need a social strategy as well. Judith's eyes gleamed. The court of public opinion, always my favorite jurisdiction. Over lunch, we drafted a plan to reconnect me with Boston's social circles, the same influential networks from which Caroline and Rebecca had subtly isolated me over the years. We made a list of charity events, cultural functions, and private gatherings where my reappearance would be noticed. The Henderson Foundation Gala is next week, Judith noted. Several of your former Harvard colleagues will be there. 3 days later, I attended my first social event in months, a charity tea benefiting Boston Children's Hospital. I wore a tailored blue suit rather than the shapeless pastels Caroline subtly pushed me toward. The difference was immediately apparent in how people approached me. Professor Sullivan, we've missed seeing you at these functions, said Elizabeth Cabot, whose family had known mine for generations. I've been preoccupied with family matters, I replied, my voice stronger than it had been in public for years. My granddaughter is getting married. At the Fairmont, I hear. Quite the extravagant affair. Yes, I'm covering the expenses as my gift. I paused deliberately. Though strangely, I seem to have been positioned behind a column for the ceremony. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. Behind a column? Surely not intentional? One would hope not, I said with a meaningful smile. The strategic seed was planted. By the end of the afternoon, I'd reconnected with a dozen influential Bostonians and arranged future lunch dates with former colleagues. Each conversation included a casual mention of the wedding, my generosity, and my curious placement behind architecture. The following week brought an appointment at the florist for final wedding arrangements. Eleanor, the talented owner, greeted me personally. "Mrs. Sullivan, it's an honor to create arrangements for your family." As we discussed details, Caroline and Rebecca arrived unexpectedly. Their surprise at finding me handling arrangements alone was poorly concealed. "Mother, you didn't need to come yourself," Caroline said, kissing my cheek perfunctorily. "We could have handled this. I'm perfectly capable of discussing flower arrangements." "Dear," I smiled at Eleanor. "We were just finalizing the contract details." "Details?" Rebecca's voice sharpened. "What details? Payment structures? Delivery timing? Business matters?" While examining sample centerpieces, Caroline pulled Eleanor aside, thinking I couldn't hear their whispered conversation. "You'll need to confirm everything with me. My mother's memory isn't what it was. Her capacity is diminished," Rebecca added, not bothering to lower her voice. "We're helping her manage her finances." Eleanor's eyes flicked to me, then back to them. Her professional smile remained fixed, but something in her expression shifted. Later, as Caroline and Rebecca examined ribbon samples across the room, Eleanor approached me. "Mrs. Sullivan, I couldn't help overhearing." She hesitated. "My grandmother experienced something similar with my aunt. If you ever need a witness to your capabilities, please call me." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "Thank you, Eleanor. I may take you up on that." That evening, Jackson came by unexpectedly, claiming he needed to discuss a wedding detail. His obvious discomfort suggested another purpose. "Ms. Sullivan, I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with everything," he said once we were seated in the study. "Rebecca sometimes gets carried away with planning." "How thoughtful of you to check, Jackson." I studied him carefully, assessing whether he could be an ally. "I'm curious, what do you know about my seating arrangement?" His confused expression answered before his words did. "Your seating? I assumed you'd be at the family table with us." "Apparently not. There's a lovely marble column with my name on it." Jackson's face flushed with genuine shock. "That's not possible. I'll speak with Rebecca immediately." "Before you do," I said, placing a gentle hand on his arm, "consider what that conversation might reveal about the woman you're planning to marry." He left visibly troubled. Exactly as I'd intended. Strategic doubts planted in the right mind could be more effective than direct confrontation. That night, I reviewed my progress. Financial protections secured, legal documentation in place, social reconnections established, potential allies identified. I glanced at my calendar, where the wedding date was circled in red. 12 days remaining until the event that Caroline and Rebecca viewed as their triumph. They had no idea it would be mine. I picked up the sapphire brooch, tracing its intricate setting with my finger. 5 generations of Sullivan women had worn it with pride on their wedding days. Rebecca would not be the 6th, not yet. First, she needed to learn what the Sullivan name truly stood for. 1 week before the wedding, I requested a final walkthrough at the Fairmont Hotel. The wedding planner seemed surprised these details were usually handled by Caroline and Rebecca, but arranged it immediately. Sandra, the hotel's event coordinator, greeted me in the ornate lobby. "Mrs. Sullivan, it's an honor to have your family celebrating here. Your granddaughter's wedding will be spectacular." "I certainly hope so, given the expense," I replied pleasantly as we entered the grand ballroom. The space was magnificent soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble columns adding architectural distinction to the historic room. Sandra reviewed the layout, describing how each area would be utilized. "And this will be your table for the reception," she said, indicating a position on the floor plan. I squinted at the small circle marked "Family of Bride, Grandmother," positioned behind one of the ballroom's massive columns. "There must be some mistake," I said calmly. "This location appears to be behind a column." Sandra shuffled uncomfortably. "The seating chart was approved by Miss Rebecca personally." "I see. And did Miss Rebecca explain why her grandmother should be seated in a position where I can neither see nor be seen during this celebration?" Sandra's professional composure cracked slightly. "She mentioned, that is, there was some concern about—" She cleared her throat. "Miss Rebecca suggested that your visibility might distract from the aesthetic of the photographs." The words landed like a physical blow, but decades of negotiation experience kept my expression neutral. My visibility, my aging face, My elderly body deemed an aesthetic liability to be hidden away. I checked the silver pocket watch strapped to my wrist. How fascinating. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm terribly sorry. I can certainly adjust the seating. I held up my hand, stopping her. No need to apologize, Sandra. Some columns are meant to hide us. Others become the support we need when we decide to stand up. Her confused expression almost made me smile. The seating will remain as my granddaughter wishes, I continued. I have no desire to disrupt her vision for the perfect wedding photographs. Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by something else, respect, perhaps for my apparent selflessness. Now, regarding the payment schedule, I continued, I'd like to confirm the timing of the final transfer. Yes, as you arranged, the substantial remaining balance will process automatically at 8 p.m. on the wedding day. Perfect. And the cancellation policy remains as stated in our contract? Sandra looked puzzled but confirmed. Yes, you may cancel without penalty up to 24 hours before the event, though that's certainly just a formality at this point. Of course, just confirming all details. I smiled reassuringly. One must be thorough when spending several $100,000. Back home, I called Judith to set our final arrangements in motion. Everything is prepared, she confirmed. The car will pick you up at 8:15 p.m. on Saturday. Your luggage will be collected discreetly tomorrow. The tickets and reservations are confirmed in your name only. And the letters? Drafted as instructed, with copies of all relevant evidence attached. They'll be delivered Sunday morning to the specified recipients. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a surprising calm. The machinery was in motion now, all the gears aligned, all the timing set. That evening, I carefully selected what to pack for my impending journey. Not the matronly clothes Caroline had gradually introduced into my wardrobe, but items I'd secretly purchased online in recent weeks, elegant, age-appropriate clothing that reflected the woman I truly was. From my safe, I retrieved documents Caroline didn't know existed, investments my husband and I had established decades ago, quietly growing separate from the family trust. Funds that would now finance my independence and, if necessary, my family's consequences. I placed Judge Sullivan's pocket watch beside our wedding photograph on the nightstand. George had been gone 15 years, but I could still hear his voice clearly. Maggie, you've always been 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Don't let them make you forget that. My phone rang, Rebecca calling to confirm final details. I answered with the warm, slightly confused tone they'd come to expect. Grandma, just checking you have the right time for hair and makeup on Saturday. Yes, dear. 10 a.m. Perfect. And remember, blue looks best on you for the photos. The photos I'll be in? I couldn't resist asking. Of course. The family portraits before the ceremony. A pause. You'll be tired by the reception, though, so we've given you a more private table for your comfort. Behind a column, I stated flatly. Another pause, longer this time. Who told you that? It's not behind a column. It's just positioned for your comfort. The ease with which she lied was almost impressive. Almost. I'm sure you've thought of everything, Rebecca. We have, Grandma. It's going to be perfect. After hanging up, I finalized the last details of my plan. Every vendor payment structure verified, every contract clause confirmed, every escape route secured. I opened the velvet box containing the sapphire brooch one last time, then closed it firmly and placed it in my handbag. Not to give away, but to hold in reserve for a lesson yet to be taught. Saturday would arrive in 5 days. My family expected to see an aging woman, positioned conveniently out of sight, silently financing their celebration. Instead, they would learn what generations of Bostonians already knew. You underestimate Margaret Sullivan at your peril. The Fairmont Hotel glittered like a jewel box on the wedding day. Every extravagant detail executed flawlessly, the flowers, lighting, music, and champagne, creating exactly the atmosphere Rebecca had demanded and I had financed. I arrived precisely on schedule, dressed in a tailored navy silk ensemble that subtly communicated power rather than fragility. The antique watch was secured elegantly at my wrist, its weight both comforting and purposeful. The photographer barely acknowledged me during family portraits, focusing primarily on the bride while I was positioned at the periphery, present enough to fulfill obligation but easy to crop out later if desired.